I trained at St Martin's School of Art because I decided quite grandly as a 9-year-old to be an artist. I was very inspired by a great aunt who taught art. And then when I went to school I had this little flurry of wanting to act, but I couldn't get any good parts. So I was very big for my age. I was tall, described big. So I never got any parts. So I thought, oh, sod that. I kind of always wanted to be a bit in control, and then developed this great passion to go to art school. And I went to evening classes in Sidcup to learn life drawing, and that's what got my portfolio together, because I'd been to grammar school for the sixth form and the art was terrible. I got E for art A level. I was quite proud of that. But I had this fantastic portfolio and got into St Martin's, which was a suburban trip from where I lived in the suburbs of London. And so I went up there every day for 4 years on the train. My mum wouldn't let me live in London. And I did a 1-year foundation course. It was called Pre-Dip then because it was a diploma. And then I did 3-year diploma course in painting. Got into the painting school. And slightly lost my way because you were like expected to be an artist, and I was just I was 18, and I thought, even then I thought, this is ridiculous, I'm supposed to know what I want to do all the time. And so I did an awful lot of painting and colour studies, because my mother said if I didn't make stuff, I'd have to leave, So I sort of just did an awful lot of work to fill the time, but in hindsight, it was terrifically productive. And then I think that making, or doing something, which I did for most of my 20s, is not to be underestimated. The doing of something a lot. And then I got very disillusioned, basically, with the art world. I really did. I love painting and sculpture. They're probably my favourite art forms, truly. But the galleries, there was virtually no books, nothing written about women artists. I was a nice middle-class girl, supposedly. I actually wasn't. My behaviour behind the scenes was wild. But appeared to be that. Marry a tutor, that sort of destiny, have children. But I couldn't see any work that was anything like what I thought or felt. And I didn't know about the feminist movement. I was pretty disillusioned with it all. I saw it as very elitist, and it was and is to a degree, the gallery scene. So I decided to give it up, and I tried to be a businesswoman dyeing baseball boots, selling them through NME. And I did that for a while, living in a very decrepit building, but I got very frustrated. And then I've always loved cooking, and had a passion for cooking, making cakes when I was a teenager. And one night I made a very bad cake of a baseball boot. And St Martin's was the sort of British school of sculpture. It was hugely grand and, caro. They would sort of walk around with these huge girders, and students sort of gazing at their work, which was all very macho. And this cake was so badly made and so crappy, and it was just the most exciting moment of my life artistically. I was looking at this badly made cake and thinking, this is a work of craft of great significance. I was going to take it in smart and say, here's a work of art of great significance. And I just, God, I always going on about that cake, but it was a utter turning point, because it was my own language, and it was so irreverent, and it was so liberating. I made a lot of work in my 20s, and sort of made a bit of a name for myself to a degree as a young feminist artist, but I felt a bit stuck in that I felt I was preaching to the converted in the context where I was showing my work, but also we very much wanted children. I thought I'd carry on making my work, but I had my daughter in 1980 and my son in 1983. And what was astonishing, I hadn't anticipated that I lost my entitlement to make my own work. It was partly because I was so busy, but it was actually deeper. And it took me quite a few years to work out that was because there wasn't any history of women in my family who'd done what they really wanted when they had children. They quite often worked, but they didn't do what they wanted. And so I worked with my ex-husband, which I absolutely loved. He's a photographer, and I became a photographic stylist, and I was like buzzing around London doing cookery books and things like that. So I actually learnt a lot from that whole sector, which has informed what I've done since. But I couldn't make my own work, and it was 8 years, increasingly felt frustrated, but also hugely lacking in confidence. And finally, because I'd become quite, I suppose you'd say, politicised about how shocked I was that bringing up small children didn't have more status and more support. That what had happened to me was that I immediately lost my sense of self when I had a child. And I do feel it's the most central and important part of any society, is to celebrate and support the bringing up of small children. That first 5 years is crucial, and you need to support parents and the children. And I was shocked and sort of very angry about that. And I had a lot of things happen, very normal things. So I made a show about that.
As I will have explained earlier, I did train as a painter, but I have absolutely no training as a dancer. But I feel compelled to put this in a dancerly fashion. So I'll do my best, okay. Woo! Oh, God, I just don't know how they do it. I feel so dizzy. It's terrible. Oh no. Never mind.
I did that show, and then I did a couple of other things. One was cook downs. I started working with this very dear friend who we had a long 16 years working together as sort of co-director, collaborator, Paul Ballock-Brown. And as that carried on, I just felt there was a huge amount more material about daily life, domesticity, children, shopping, cooking, the whole thing. And the first show that occurred to me was with the London International Festival. Well, I had thought that I wanted to open my kitchen to the public. I had this idea that I wanted to show what went on, and that Lift commissioned that called Kitchen Show.
When I get angry in my kitchen, I really feel the need to do something very violent in order to release the tension. I think that's quite good for you too. And I find that the best thing to do is to throw a ripe pear against a cupboard door is best, because then you've got vinyl paint and it's easier to wipe it down afterwards. So I go right back and I slowly move up, building up the speed as I go, and then at the moment of hurling, I always shout very loudly because that releases tension. I like to remind you of this action by keeping a pear in my breast pocket. It's sort of way of having some ammo there if I need it later.
So we produced the Kitchen Show film before I even performed it, actually. When I look back, and it's a really like it. It's about 20 minutes long. And so then for How to Live, it was this idea of it being a lecture on supermarket shopping. So how do you illustrate a lecture, and how do you get various points across? So, and some of the images and ideas, like bathing naked in a glass of wine, red wine, you can't really do that on a stage. So we sort of developed a storyboard. Paul and Carol and I worked quite closely together and came up with this storyboard. And there were several bits of film. There's a supermarket dash. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but that was working with her. And that was really complex, but it worked very well, I think, in the show. got a flatbed truck and bolted a car seat onto the back with a strap, and I had a megaphone, so with battery, and then we had banners made to go all the way around the truck, which said "Pull yourself together" in red letters. And on the back, I found this. It was Mental Health Foundation, and they had Mental Health Action Week that was just starting then. So we did it during that, and a little group of their campaigners on Trafalgar Square waiting as we went past. So we got that all ready, and then we drove around London for a whole day, shouting at people to pull yourself together. And there was Lada with Hugo Glendinning and Lois Keaton and everybody trailing around in a car behind, trying to get photographs. But it was an extraordinary experience and absolutely terrifying, because I hadn't really thought it through till I was on the truck, on the car seats. I had a friend and Steve Wald, technical director, driving, but I couldn't get my phone out to phone them, and I was just there, stuck. And the trouble is, when you pull up at traffic lights, you're there, and the passers-by or people sitting in the car next to you, and you're stuck at the lights, and oh gosh, I can't tell you how embarrassing it is. And so we drove round. I lived nearby in Holloway, so we set off from there, and we arrived down, and I just knew I couldn't shout at anyone. I thought I'd spend the whole day just kind of waving like the Queen. And then I got down to Camden Town, and there were these builders by the side of the road, and I shouted at them. And it was directional, the microphone, and they turned around and they just couldn't stop laughing. And they went, "Now you pull yourself together." And from then on, it was just a question of going round and round and trying things out, and each area of London was different. It was thrilling but immediate and almost uncapturable. Claire Alland, who's with me, wrote this great piece about it, but since then I've done it a few times. In Holland, there's a film on YouTube, but also for Bonkers Fest in 2007 and 2008, and it's just a curious thing to do, and it's almost the idea of doing it that has had more impact than the doing of it.
Cheer up! Buck up! Hello! 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 Pull yourselves together! Come on! Cheer up! Cop up! Hello!
Usually when people who've been in the bin or, any kind of distress, that things that are done from them were done by the outreach or the educational, the learning departments of these cultural institutions. And, they're really quite often terrific and really great people running them, but they are rather sort of come in, for us, or they're just one-off, or they're not run by you yourself. You are the grateful guest to these local places, and the culture goes one way. We are giving you our culture. You come and do a bit what we do. We don't know what you do. And really wanting to change that power structure so that you aren't assumed to be the pathetically grateful recipients. Because in the day centre, I went to a really wonderful day at the Serpentine, and we weren't pathetically grateful, but we were, because it was such an amazing day out, and they'd got the money together to do that. So we wanted to tip the balance so that it was more equal. So initially the idea was like setting up an art school or an academy, academicians. But then somehow as a group, this idea of, because I'm really critical of the diagnostic framework, as you've gathered, and, demedicalising misery, that this idea of critiquing diagnosis in a playful way by actually just going and diagnosing institutions. Like you diagnose a hospital, or you could diagnose the House of Parliament, you could diagnose a museum. It was just thrilling. And so we tried this pre-pilot at Shuffle Festival in Mile End, and absolutely not knowing what would happen, we came up with this idea, well, let's just try it in a little way. So we've got pre-pilots, pilots. But, the ideas are always hugely ambitious, so you try and chunk it out. So we did this, and we chose 5 things. So it was like a bench, a bin, a tree, a pond, a gate, and put a stake up, and we'd go out with little tours and have these questionnaires to discuss things such as, like, has this bench got a social anxiety disorder? And really not knowing. There was an awful moment when it started where I thought, what's anybody going to say? This is so stupid. And people just instantly got engaged with concern for the bench. And then the best bit about it, the vital bit, is the group of us artists leading these tours. So it's not, there were 5 of us in this instance, just all in white coats, discussing our experience of mental health system, our experience of being labelled. I started doing the drawings, as I've sort of written, just because I thought I'd be 3 weeks in that day centre. Just because they had an art room and I was so shocked to be there, I thought it would be a great activity. And as I said, I did a lot of painting at art school, but I hadn't really done any since. So I'd wanted to do watercolour, so I took all the materials on the first day to make it a project. And then, of course, it became a completely huge part of my life, because it was like if I didn't do the drawing, I was just going to sink and die, or, and the first couple of years were really unwieldy trying to fit in doing the drawing when I went to the day centre, so I made the rule to do 1 a week. So it became much more flexible. The exhibition opened in 2009, and I finished the drawings summer 2008. I'd managed to get myself discharged from the mental health system. And I thought I would carry on. I knew the last drawing, which is that on the Daily Stream of Consciousness, I knew that was the end of that period of my life. It was a very conscious decision. But I'd assumed I'd go on doing the drawings just as a routine. But I couldn't. I've got a very good friend, Miriam Hodson, and I said, no, I'm getting behind with the drawings. I haven't done one for 3 months. And she said, you don't have to do them. You can have a rest. And it was such a liberating thing. And actually that was when it became apparent that was then. I'd done those drawings I was 11 years, and that felt much better. And because it was a pretty extreme experience to exhibit them and to get people's response, that took quite a while to process. And I did very little drawing. I haven't done a huge amount of drawing since, but I'm about to, I hope, embark on a new era of drawing. I absolutely challenge the framework and the story and the narrative that's being created in society, that once mad, always mad, once a loser, always a loser. I challenge the idea that mental illness is deficit or weakness anyway. I think it's part of human experience, and it's something you can live with and use, and there are all sorts of ways of approaching it, but I challenge that story. And so it's almost like the imperative of surviving and telling new stories and being seen in a new way is very important. That seemed to me at the time, this awful thing, the only way to challenge that story was to live. And then, I'd had cancer, and you just think, what if you die? And you really are then the person who has been overcome by this kind of cliche, or actually injustice to a degree. But that's why I also realised that, from good support from people, that writing my own words on the drawings, writing my own captions, writing your own account of your life first is a very powerful thing, because you can't challenge that. They can't challenge that, those people who write those stories.